Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a courtyard. Not your average one with plastic chairs and a half-dead plant in the corner, but an Ottoman courtyard where the floor is blanketed with patterned carpets. The kind of colors that make you feel both sleepy and slightly disoriented at the same time. There's the sound of trickling water from a fountain, steady enough to remind you that your bladder may not appreciate this later, but soothing all the same. The lamps along the walls glow with a honey-colored flame, and the air smells faintly of roasted beans, the kind of beans that once caused centuries of debate over whether they were divine medicine or dangerous mischief. Asterisk. You step softly into this evening. But first, and important survival warning, you probably wouldn't last long here. Not that you'd be kidnapped or betrayed. More likely, you'd keel over from caffeine shock. Ottoman coffee was famously strong, brewed in ways that make today's espresso look like a child's juice box. But don't worry. Here, in this story, your heart rate isn't going to thump through your ribs. You'll only sip as much as you comfortably can, and your stomach will handle it politely and like me, after 3 espressos at 11 p.m. asterisk. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Asterisk, and while you're at it, drop a comment below with your location and the local time you're curled up listening. I always love knowing where in the world my little stories are drifting off to. Whether it's 7 p.m. in Seattle or 2 a.m. in Cape Town. Asterisk now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Asterisk, the courtyard is hushed, broken only by the occasional laughter from neighboring rooms. Your eyes wander across the architecture, tall, carved arches, latticed windows that spill candlelight, and scent-warmed air, heavy with spices stored somewhere nearby. Cumin, maybe cinnamon. Hard to tell which aroma is stronger. What you're sure of, though, is that everything here exists at a slower pace. Like time has decided to recline on one of the cushions and exhale. Asterisk, you pass under an arch, where your host greets you with a nod that feels as formal as it is warm. You're being welcomed not into a restaurant or tavern in the Western sense, but into a space designed for conversation and community. Coffeehouses or kahvehane were both sanctuaries and crossroads, comfortable shrines for idle talk, intellectual debates, poetic recitations, and games of strategy that could go on through the night. Asterisk, one widely agreed fact is that the Ottoman Empire treated coffee not just as a drink, but as an institution. By the 16th century, coffeehouses had spread throughout Istanbul like cozy mushrooms. People gathered in hundreds of them, lounging on carpets, smoking long-stemmed pipes, or trading stories thick with exaggeration. Asterisk, your host leads you deeper into this particular courtyard, where the fountain's song softens into the background. Somewhere along the wall, a brass tray clinks. Tiny cups sit ready, each one delicate, as though designed for very serious dollhouses. The detail that keeps you smiling is how small each serving truly is. Today, we gulp coffee from mugs the size of flower pots. But here, it's offered in cups, so dainty they could rest in the palm of your hand with room for 3 more. Asterisk. There's something to the rhythm of this place. Water, cracking fires, gentle laughs, distant lute music that tugs like a lullaby. You sit, easing onto embroidered cushions, and notice the dimensions of the room. Low tables, everything close to the floor, encouraging you to slide, recline, maybe even drift toward sleepiness. Honestly, half the patrons look as though they're moments away from napping mid-debate. Asterisk still. Historians point out a curious contradiction. Coffeehouses weren't sleepy at all in their social impact. They were lively engines of culture and conversation. You could hear poetry recitations that made listeners applaud, or chess matches stretching into dawn. So you're in this comfortable courtyard, feeling your brain melt into the pillows, while in reality, these spaces may have been the loudest, busiest hubs in town. It's a gentle irony your body relaxes, but your mind follows threads of conversation in languages half familiar. Asterisk, the quirky detail here is that these spaces were sometimes nicknamed schools of the wise, and admittedly, to outsiders, it may have looked less like a school and more like a slumber party for adults who couldn't get over how much they loved a hot drink. Yet, the very word kahvehane carried weight. It wasn't only where stories and laughter flowed, but also where news traveled, sometimes faster than the official channels. Asterisk. And one mystery still lingers. Did these Ottoman coffeehouses spark new ideas simply because the people were brilliant, or because they were so heavily caffeinated that sleep deprivation gave them hallucinations of brilliance? Historians debate the role of coffee. Was it fuel for insight or for endless babbling? You sip from your tiny cup and realize it's both. Caffeine sharpens your senses just enough to notice the starry sky above, framed perfectly by the courtyard walls. Asterisk, the fountain murmurs on. The warmth in your cup drifts into your hands. Your shoulders loosen into the embroidered pillows. Around you, the conversations of poets and merchants flutter like gentle rain, always murmuring, never storming. And you, too, sink in, caught within the rhythm of this place where time itself takes deep, drowsy breaths. The scent of roasting beans thickens in the air, as if the courtyard itself is inhaling and exhaling. Your host restrained, graceful, a little amused that you keep staring at everything like a wide-eyed tourist in sandals, leans over to the hearth where a tray of copper pots waits. They gleam faintly, with years of loving use, not polish. What you're about to experience is no quick pour-over or humming Keurig machine. It's a brewing method that demands patience. More patience than most of us modern people are willing to muster before caffeine hits our bloodstream. Asterisk, he picks up one of the long-handled pots, a cesk, placing it low over glowing coals. The flames don't leap or snap. They simmer like cats curled by the fire. Into the vessel goes finely ground coffee, water measured with a focus bordering on poetic, and if you're lucky, maybe a soft sprinkle of cardamom to nudge the flavor. No filters, no timers, no barista scribbling your name slightly wrong on a paper cup. Just slow alchemy, foam rising grain by grain, bubble by bubble. Asterisk, you notice it takes a long time. The cezve is lifted away before it boils, a ritual as much about watching as tasting. Tiny foam builds up at the edges, but the trick is control, patience, restraint, almost like the pot wants to erupt, but is coaxed into quiet. The first pour becomes an act of intimacy. You realize, wryly, that modern coffee drinkers might not survive this wait. We want caffeine fast, through drive-through windows, before we even put on shoes. Here, though, you wait, and you wonder if waiting is the real point of the encounter. Asterisk, one fact is clear. Historians tell us that Ottomans prided themselves on this slow ritual. The presentation reflected hospitality, precision, and status. Serving coffee wasn't just about filling a cup. It was a performance of taste, social grace, and even cultural sophistication. You weren't merely handed liquid. You were given a crafted experience, often with delicate foam topping the surface as a mark of skill. Asterisk, the lamps flicker along the walls as your host pours that first trickle into a cup smaller than the palm of your hand. Coffees are lined in sets of 2 or more on brass trays, served quietly but ceremoniously. You lift one, fingers brushing porcelain so delicate it feels like holding a hatchling bird. Steam curls upward, carrying soft, earthy notes. Mesmerized, you realize these aromas shaped entire eras of conversation. They became the fuel of late-night poetry, the rhythm of whispered gossip, the spark of debates that outlasted the oil lamps themselves. Asterisk A. Curious detail emerges in your mind. Europeans at first called this bizarre. Thick brew, the drink of the Turks. It seemed exotic, even suspicious, though it would eventually become essential to every morning commute. Travelers described the coffee not only by its effects, but by the unfamiliar ritual around it, the copper cezve, the froth, the small some, too polite to admit its strength, simply said it was like drinking black ink. Though one suspects most of them still finished the cup, and historians still wonder about something more philosophical. Was the charm of Ottoman coffee houses in the beverage itself, or in the ambience the ritual created? Would a bitter brew have taken off in such grand cultural fashion, without the layered rituals of waiting, pouring, sipping slowly? Was the secret not in the beans at all, but in the shared discipline of patience? You take your first sip. It's strong, a thick velvet with grounds swirling at the bottom. A living reminder to drink carefully, lest you get a mouthful of tiny sand-like grit. The taste is earthy, sharper than what you're used to, but oddly soothing. Around you, cushions swallow people whole, while the gentle hum of voices rises again. For a moment, you catch yourself rocking slightly, cup poised like a musician holding a delicate note almost, lulled by the very intensity of the flavors. A man nearby plays the oud, strings quivering softly in the corner. Another leans over a chessboard, pieces carved with intricate crescents. Someone debates a line of poetry in a voice thick as molasses. The hot liquid in your cup warms your palms, and the glow of the fire softens your eyes. Outside the courtyard walls, life in the city moves fast, markets hopping with merchants, alleys crowded with donkeys and traders, the constant hum of business. But here, coffee slows time. Sips soak into conversation, like ink into damp paper. You feel the lull between each gesture, the hesitation before foam stirs, the waiting for voices to rise again. Patience becomes contagious. And in this patience, there's that sly hint of humor swirling in the air. People managed to sit for hours over cups that barely filled a shot glass. Think of that, spending entire evenings dissecting poetry, laws, or just the neighborhood gossip, all with a drink that vanishes in 2 swallows. It's a little bit absurd, a little bit profound, the perfect contradiction for a bedtime history wander. Foam settles. Voices blur, the courtyard arches keep watch, and you sink deeper into your cushion as the coffee carries you into the rhythm of timeless waiting. Your cup rests in your hand like a secret. It is warm, almost too warm, the heat rising through the porcelain as if reminding you, patience, friend. To gulp it down would be to miss the point entirely. Here, in this corner of an Ottoman coffee house, speed is the enemy, and savoring is the only acceptable pace. You hold the dainty little vessel up to your lips, but pause. The foam dances gently on the surface, a delicate crown balancing on darkness. Your host gives you the faintest, knowing smile, as if to say, wait, just a few more breaths. And so you do. The quiet becomes the flavor before the drink itself does. This foam, you realize, isn't just a random layer. It's the star performer. In Ottoman brewing, the thicker the foam, the more respected the server. Historians agree. Foam was a mark of skill, an art passed from careful hands to waiting guests. To serve a cup without it would be like serving a cake without frosting or handing over a pizza with no cheese. Simply unacceptable. You take the smallest sip, cautious, like a swimmer testing chilly water. The flavor is full-bodied, earthy, peppered with spice. It clings to your tongue and lingers even longer on the back of your throat. You savor it, not because you have to, but because sipping quickly would feel like sinning against a cup. Coffee this strong demands deliberation. One curious detail comes to your mind. Accounts tell us that some Ottoman coffee drinkers even read foam like fortune. They believed the lingering patterns, the bubbles and rings of residue, could whisper predictions or shape idle games of imagination, while tea leaf reading gets all the attention in modern folklore. Foam once did its own quiet work of suggesting futures, or at least sparking intriguing small talk. For a moment, you let your thoughts wander across the scene. Cushioned alcoves, tiny porcelain cups, low coals glowing like steady heartbeats. You notice others around you, some reclined so deeply they look halfway to dreaming. Others hunched so intently over chessboards that you imagine coffee is the only thing keeping them awake. A poet in the corner mutters lines to himself, pausing between phrases to sip and stare at the patterns on his cup. Asterisk. Historians still puzzle over something here. Did the Ottomans intend the foam ritual to show artistry? Or did it simply evolve into a point of pride over time? Was the foam itself respected as a cultural symbol? Or was it just the natural byproduct of a well-made brew? The mystery rests on the surface, like the shimmering crown in your cup. Asterisk. You lean back, resting your arm on a pillow stitched with golden thread. Every detail here tells you that coffee was never about drinking alone. It was about storytelling, relationships, slow evenings that defeated the rushing world outside. Time itself loosens its straps, letting you drift further into the rhythm. Asterisk. And still, there's something cheerfully contradictory about it. Whole hours are built around cups, so tiny that most modern coffee drinkers would down them without even blinking. Imagine ordering this at a modern cafe. A barista whispering solemnly, "Remember to savor the foam," as a phone-wielding customer mutters, Yeah, make it to go." And yet, here, savoring really is the law of the land. Asterisk. Your host returns, gently topping off the pot. Another round of measured foam, another deliberate sip. Your hands relax into the routine. The soft trickle of the fountain fades into background so natural, it's like a second heartbeat. Conversation murmurs, music hums faintly from a string plucked in some nook, and patience becomes its own gentle intoxication. Asterisk. You tilt the cup slightly, watch the foam edge drift downward, and realize you're in no rush to finish. That's the whole point. Nights like these, fueled by coffee and waiting, can outlast hours without ever feeling wasted. The cup may be tiny, but the ritual is grand. You're not here to fill your stomach. You're here to fill the evening with slow time itself. Asterisk. The courtyard quiet slowly opens into the world beyond, and with it, you find yourself stepping into the true heart of Ottoman evenings. The bustling kahvehane. If the courtyard was the soft whisper, this is the gentle hum, still calm by modern standards, but alive with voices, games, and drifting plumes of smoke that curl lazily like cats stretching along the ceiling beams. You take it all in, moving carefully over carpets spread in layers, each with brighter colors and stranger geometric patterns than the last. Someone should probably warn you not to stare at them too hard. If you do, you may start seeing shapes move, which is either a sign of artistry, or maybe just caffeine. Asterisk. The kahvehane is not a place of lonely cups. It is not built for silent sipping in a corner. Instead, imagine a nest of cushions encircling countless low tables, each one heavy with cups no bigger than a thumbprint. Merchants gather with flowing robes stretched comfortably around them. Students linger, books heavy in their laps, their thoughts quickened more by the brew than by the words on the page. Poets declaim under their breath, checking whether rhymes stumble or race. And across the room, the smoke of long-stemmed pipes swirls like lazy punctuation in the air. Sentences of visible exhalations. Asterisk. It is a school, a stage, a sanctuary all in one. That's a historical fact, not in doubt. Kahvehane became known as schools of the wise. But of course, wisdom is a flexible word. Some here are sharpening their minds over arguments about law or scripture. Others are sharpening their jokes. Still others, let's be frank, are just trying to stay awake long enough to beat a friend in backgammon. Asterisk. You watch a group of men bent seriously over a chessboard. The board is polished wood, the pieces surprisingly ornate. One player squints long enough that you fear he's fallen asleep. But no, he moves his rook with the dramatic pause of a general surveying terrain. The other sighs, takes a sip, and leans back against cushions. Yes, this game might last another 3 hours, or 4, possibly forever. Asterisk, there are soundscapes here that you don't expect. Metallic clinks of brass trays being set down, the plucking of a saz lute in the corner, punctuated laughter that rises and then dims. Like someone briefly remembered the quiet "please" sign. The room doesn't roar like a tavern. Instead, it murmurs. The sound is the ocean, not a storm. Asterisk now. Here comes a lovely quirky detail. Because kahvehane were such beloved gathering places, some chroniclers noted that it was almost impossible to walk through parts of Istanbul without passing the open door of one, aromas spilling onto the street, and within those doors, time stretched differently. It wasn't unusual for patrons to slip in just after afternoon prayers, and finally, stumble out with morning light sneaking between the rooftops, still caffeinated, perhaps still awake, somehow. Asterisk, but historians keep circling one question even now. What made these houses so magnetic? Was it the strength of the brew itself, addictive and thrilling for minds used to wine? Or was it the architecture of the room, the invitation to recline, the warmth of shared cups after cold streets, the bubbling of conversation in a way that gave each person a thread in a larger story? Asterisk. Whatever the reason, you sense it now, tucked into a cushion, a porcelain cup balanced carefully in your hand. It isn't just about drinking, it's about listening, about being folded into the tide of sound and smoke, about losing your sense of time. Asterisk, a student near you starts reading aloud a lesson, clearly showing off how he will outwit his examiners. Another man interrupts and wagers his friend on who can place the best verse in poetic meter. The conversation feels serious, but the laughter afterward proves it's just as playful. There is no rush. Coffee stretches into eternity here, foamed cup by foamed cup. Asterisk, and then your host quietly refreshes your drink, as if to remind you that eternity, while nice, is also measured in sips. Slip a little deeper into the cushions, and now your host gestures you quite gently, like someone coaxing a very lazy cat, to follow him toward a quieter inner chamber. The murmur of the kahvehane fades behind you, replaced by the hushed elegance of the Sultan's court. Here, the coffee ritual is not simply a lively pastime but a performance so layered and deliberate. It would make today's corporate meetings look like hasty elevator chats. Asterisk. You step into a room that smells faintly of rosewater and smoke. The walls breathe with silken drapery, and attendants move like shadows, poised, careful, reverent. This is not a place of noisy debates or sprawling carpets crowded by students. This is the palace, where even a sip of coffee is infused with ceremony. Asterisk, a tray glides in more gold than brass here, intricately patterned, gleaming in the lamplight. On it sit cups, so delicate they're almost intimidating to touch, each nestled in filigree holders that glint like captured sunshine. First, attendants bow, then they wait, then they pour. The coffee itself is brewed in the same cezve as you saw before, but here even the lifting of the pot feels rehearsed, as if time itself is expected to pause and admire. Asterisk, historically, there was such a thing as a chief coffee maker at courtyards. That was a real job, and an esteemed one too. If you'd been worrying about your resume, imagine writing brewed perfectly foamy cups for a sultan, survived intrigue, served patience in dainty measures. It might not translate to modern corporate skills, but it certainly carried clout then. The role wasn't merely domestic. Some of these brewers became trusted confidants, privy to whispers and schemes traded across steaming cups. Asterisk, and you watch as the Sultan himself takes a sip, or perhaps allows the cup to linger long enough that everyone notices his composure. Here, the coffee is more than refreshment. It is political theater. Each tilt of the cup can be interpreted. Each refill might signal favor. And honestly, you realize, this is where meetings earned their reputation for stretching far beyond their natural lifespan. Imagine today, trying to explain to your boss that the agenda will last 3 hours because the foam hasn't settled yet. Asterisk, but this length was the very point. Coffee slowed down powerful men who otherwise dictated the pace of empires. Its warmth forced patience, and its ritual required a kind of shared stillness. Asterisk, a curious detail, courtly attendants were trained so carefully that they had to prepare coffee in total silence. Imagine the pressure: your whisk of the pot too loud, your pour slightly sloppy, and you may end up reassigned to some remote province where coffee was more scarce and appreciation even scarcer. Yet, they performed flawlessly. Movements so smooth, you almost miss when the cup is placed before you. Asterisk, and historians still wonder how much of this performance was for pleasure and how much for politics. Was the Sultan soothed or entertained? Or was each slow sip carefully watched by his advisors to extract signs of approval? Did anyone relax in this ritual, truly, or was it a stage-managed theater of relaxation designed to cloak power in velvet quiet? Asterisk, you sip, carefully mirroring the others in the room. The coffee tastes unchanged, but suddenly feels heavier, as though it carries the weight of centuries. The Sultan gazes outward, unreadable. You wonder if you were him. Would you truly taste the coffee, or would the pageantry swallow the flavor whole? Asterisk, outside the chamber, the world bustles on with merchants, scholars, poets, none of whom sip with quite so much consequence. Yet, here you are, encircled with attendants and golden trays, whispering tapestries, and a sultan leaning into silence. Asterisk, somehow though, all this careful solemnity makes you smile, because, for all the grandeur, it's still just coffee. At the end of the day, perhaps emperors and poets alike need the same calming sip, and perhaps that's the most grounding truth of all. Asterisk, asterisk, the echoes of the Sultan's chamber fade, and now your steps soften along corridors draped in muted fabrics. You find yourself slipping into a gentler world, separated from the grand theatrics of politics. This is where coffee takes on a different personality, less strategic, more tender, wrapped in laughter low enough to keep secrets, and chatter light enough to outlast candles. You've wandered into the women's quarters, the harem, where the ritual of coffee belongs to stories and companionship. Asterisk, the air here feels warmer, less staged, and faintly perfumed with jasmine and rose, instead of attendants casting rehearsed glances. Women recline along cushions that look distinctly more comfortable than the regimented ones you saw earlier. There is color everywhere, silks in pinks, blues, and oranges that seem designed to remind you the world can be soft. It feels like placing your head directly into a jewelry box, and above it all is the fragrance of coffee being carried in on a tray, strong, foamy, inevitable. Coffee does not bow to etiquette here. It arrives like an old friend dropping in with a sly grin. Asterisk, here, among women, the experience is imbued with play, a quiet rebellion against the stiffness of pomp. A serving girl brings in a tray of cups, each dainty, but balanced with sweets clustered on plates beside them. Lokum glistens like gemstones, candied slices of quince sparkle with sugar dust, and pistachios crown every pile like emeralds, declaring their importance. If the Sultan sipped slowly in silence, here the cups are punctuated by quick bursts of laughter and teasing quips that land like throwing cushions. Asterisk 1. Fact stands firm. In Ottoman households, coffee was more than just refreshment. It became a language of intimacy, established rituals of hospitality, and even tests of compatibility. There is an old practice, almost mischievous, where a bride-to-be would serve her suitor's family coffee during a visit, but sometimes with a small secret spoonful of salt added to his cup. Not sugar, not spice, just salt. If the young man drank politely, without complaint, it was proof that he possessed patience and humility. If he spat it out dramatically, well, perhaps not husband material. You watch as one woman mimics exactly this, pretending to offer her friend a salted sip, both falling into laughter that tumbles like spilled beans. Asterisk, a quirky tidbit lingers, whispered like a side note. Some harem women would read fortunes, not from foam shapes, but from the dried grounds left at the bottom of a cup. Tilt it, spin it, drizzle it back down. Suddenly the residue could look like letters, animals, or paths. Were they glimpses of futures, or just clever conversation starters to stretch long evenings into little adventures? Nobody can say for sure. Historians admit that fortune reading spread widely through Ottoman society. Yet whether people believed or simply enjoyed the charm is still an open question. Asterisk, and here you are, watching it unfold among laughter. Instead of tension or ceremony, there is ease-hushed chatter about family affairs, children's mischievous antics, or maybe just gossip about which merchant wore the most ridiculous turban plumes today. The coffee passes between them with the rhythm of a good story. Sip, murmur, laugh, repeat. Asterisk, you stretch yourself against plump cushions and think. There's something deeply relaxing about realizing people centuries ago giggled late into the night over frothy cups of bitter coffee and tiny sweets. These gatherings didn't end in decrees or wars. They ended in yawns and satisfied smiles, with cups standing empty like silent participants. Asterisk, historians still muse. Did such small circles of laughter hold subtle power, shaping relationships and influence behind the glittering curtain of official history? Could quiet gatherings over cups of foam ripple outward, nudging decisions that textbooks never acknowledged? Perhaps so. You can never quite measure the weight of words exchanged when people feel safe. And coffee makes people feel safe in its dependable warmth. Asterisk, from your soft seat, you feel a sleepy kind of envy. Your shoulders dip further into the pillows as the women laugh around you. Light, free, not worrying about foam standards or political signals. Just using coffee as an excuse to linger in each other's company. The quiet clink of cups against saucers is the universal language of let's stay a little longer. Asterisk, and you know, leaning into your cushion, that if you had the choice, you too would stay a little longer. The laughter from the women's chamber softens into echoes behind you, and your path winds once more into the layered alleys of Istanbul's soul. This time, the coffee's aroma seems to mingle with incense and murmured prayers. Here, the conversation shifts away from foamy crowns and playful gossip into weightier territory. The crossroad where coffee meets religion. Asterisk. You find yourself near a small madrasa courtyard, where scholars in flowing robes sit in deliberate circles. Their cups are there, naturally, but the atmosphere is noticeably more thoughtful than the easy banter you left behind. For centuries, coffee did not simply slip into Ottoman society unnoticed. It caused debates that fizzed hotter than the coals under the set. Some officials argued coffee sharpened the mind for worship and study, a gift to keep hearts alert through long nocturnal prayers. Others, however, called it suspicious, a brew that unsettled the order of things. Asterisk, one fact is undebatable. In the early 16th century, scholars in places like Mecca and Cairo confronted this very question. Was coffee a stimulant meant to aid devotion, giving worshippers stamina for nightly vigils? Or was it an intoxicant like wine, stealthily forbidden by faith? At times, bans were even declared, only to be overturned again by other jurists who shrugged and said, more or less, surely God did not send us a being this wonderful just to ban it. And so the debate brewed, pun gently intended. Asterisk, around you. Voices rise like threads weaving a tapestry. One elder scholar lifts his hand, eyes intent, declaring coffee to be sacred as it preserved wakefulness during long recitations. Another frowns, muttering that caffeine is nothing but rascally mischief in disguise. Someone snickers softly into their cup clearly. Not everyone is too troubled about theology when the foam is this good. Asterisk. Historians still wrestle with the puzzle. How did opinions swing so fiercely in such short spans? Was it merely coffee's novelty that invited suspicion? Or was it its uncanny ability to alter human rhythm, keeping eyelids wide when custom said they should droop shut? There's something dangerous about wakefulness. After all, Alert minds notice too much, speak too much, and sometimes question their leaders too much. Perhaps the bubbling of the cezve was as unsettling politically as it was spiritually. Asterisk. And here's a curious little nugget of history to make you smile. In some corners, clerics supposedly feared that coffeehouses were becoming schools of dissent. After all, if you keep people awake deep into the night, they're bound to solve the empire's problems over chessboards and backgammon dice. Imagine trying to explain to them that 500 years later, we'd call that behavior pulling an all-nighter at a diner with bad pancakes. Coffee didn't just perk individuals up, it perked ideas up, shaking them free from silence. Asterisk yet. The mood here isn't hostile, it's contemplative, drowsily alive. You listen as the arguments float past, sipping carefully from your own cup. The foam is still steady, still rich, and strangely, instead of waking you frantically, it pulls you into a soft cocoon of thought. You watch the faces around you, half illuminated by lamplight, scholars debating gently, heads tilting thoughtfully, others leaning against the walls in a place balanced between worship and wonder. Asterisk, and the night rolls on. The fountain mumbles quietly nearby, papers shuffle when a passage from scripture is cited, and cups clink again as attendants refill them. The debate may never resolve, but perhaps resolution was never the point. Coffee, like prayer, was about rhythm, ritual, practice. It wasn't about an answer carved in stone, but about lingering in the questions as long as possible. Sustained sip by sip. Asterisk, as you lean back, you laugh quietly to yourself, because some things never change. Centuries later, we are still debating whether coffee is a sacred lifeline or a guilty vice. And yet, in both centuries, most of us keep right on drinking it anyway. Asterisk, the courtyard above spreads into stars, wheeling silently. Your own eyelids droop as scholars continue their low murmurs, forever circling the line between devotion and indulgence, between sacred clarity and suspicious stimulation. Asterisk, the scholars' murmurs fade into the night air, and once again you drift along the narrow streets of Istanbul. This time, though the tone curls into something far more mischievous, you push through the carved doorway of another coffee house, but this one hums with a different energy and edge of secrecy, a slyness to the voices. The smell of smoke is thicker here, the laughter sharper, the silence is more intentional. You have slipped into a cup of conspiracies. Asterisk here, the coffee house becomes less a parlor and more a parliament of whispers. Men sit close, shoulders almost touching, cups clutched like tokens of loyalty, as words scatter and swirl around the room. The lids of brass pots clink, as attendants pour more of the frothy brew. Yet, there's not much of the carefree giggle you heard in the women's chambers earlier. Here, conversation rides that gentle line between philosophy, satire, and political critique. Asterisk one unshakable fact. Ottoman authorities worried deeply about these places. Too many leaders. Coffee houses weren't just hangouts, they were potential hotbeds of subversion. They were often described as schools of the rebels, because the combination of sharpened wit, caffeine, and endless long nights had a way of sparking questions about government, taxes, or the peculiar quirks of current rulers, and rulers rarely consider curiosity to be very restful. Asterisk, you notice in one shadowed corner, two men lean in over a chessboard, their conversation darting lighter than the pieces they move. They discuss poems, yes, but the poems carry metaphors so sharp you can almost hear the point beneath the rhyme. In another nook, someone recites a verse that seems harmless on its surface, yet the smirks and half-hidden chuckles of his friends suggest every listener understands the disguised barb aimed at someone holding high office. Chess and satire become twin weapons here, played under the cover of low oil lamps. Asterisk, here's the quirky detail that makes you grin. A few sultans reportedly grew so suspicious of coffee houses that messengers and spies were dispatched to lurk nearby. ears tilted sideways to catch dangerous chatter. Imagine it. Royal operatives straining through half-cracked doors, just to hear if the men inside were discussing brewing foam or brewing rebellion. The idea is almost funny until you realize the men inside knew they were being spied on. So conversations might be deliberately layered. A game of cat and mouse crafted out of metaphors. Historians, however, still toy with an open question. Were these conspiratorial reputations exaggerated by the authorities in a kind of paranoia? Or were coffeehouses truly fueling insurrections under the thin veil of odes and chessboards? Was it a justified concern, or just caffeine making rulers jittery before anyone else even touched their cups? The uncertainty lingers, like the faint froth clinging stubbornly to the rim of your porcelain. Despite whispers and watchful glances, the room does not feel dangerous. In fact, it feels oddly cozy and irony thick enough to spread on bread. These are not daggers and cloak conspiracies, but soft-voiced jokes, unfinished verses, laughter disguised under coughs, and a fellowship built on steaming cups. Long tables glisten with brass trays, dice roll, lutes strum faintly. The conspiracies here, however small or large, unfold as slowly as the foam forming in the next pot by the fire. You lean back into your corner. A man at another table theatrically raises his eyebrows at you. An unspoken invitation to join in some whispered argument about taxes or treaties. Instead, you smile faintly and cradle your cup. Tonight, you're an observer, content to let the foam and the rumors swirl around you while your cushion takes your weight. And you realize half dreamy, half amused that coffeehouses made rebellion look almost too comfortable. If you're going to critique power, why not do it on embroidered pillows with warm cups in your hands? The fire crackles, laughter dips, and the lamp smoke curls upward, pulling nighttime secrets with it, dissolving them into the rafters, where they remain safe and unsolved. Your eyes drift toward a corner where the chatter softens, and an attendant enters, balancing a silver tray of delights that glint in candlelight. If Section 8 was whispers and conspiracies, Section 9 is a sugar-laced comfort, a reminder that the Ottomans liked their coffee exactly as they liked their gatherings, paired with something sweet. And it makes perfect sense, because if you've been sipping this bitter, earthy brew for hours, your tongue is probably begging for rescue. Laid upon the tray is lokum, what you might know as Turkish delight slices of jewel-toned gel studded with pistachios or perfumed with rosewater. They wobble slightly in their pyramids of powdered sugar, threatening to smudge fingertips with sweet snow. Next to them, candied fruits glisten as though they've been sculpted from stained glass, and bowls of honeyed nuts add crunch to the otherwise velvety palate. The room brightens. Even the conspirators in the corner pause from their chess games. Cups may spark conversation, but the sweets seal it into memory. 1. Broadly agreed historical fact. By the 17th century, sweets had become essential companions to the Ottoman coffee tray. Court protocol demanded it, merchants thrived on it, and common coffeehouses quickly adopted it. A sip of bitter brew, a nibble of rose-scented lokum. The rhythm wasn't optional. It was tradition. To serve only coffee and neglect the sugar was unthinkable, almost inhospitable. And here comes the quirky detail worthy of a midnight smile. Early European accounts of visiting Ottoman coffeehouses often focused more on the sweets than the coffee itself. Travelers sometimes returned home raving less about the thick black drink they half understood, and more about the chewy cubes of lokum, as though they had stumbled upon a dessert shop masked as a temple of thought. Importers rushed to replicate it, though let's be honest, not every European confectioner had the steady hand to pull off boiled sugar and rosewater without producing disasters worthy of dental lawsuits. You take one of the wobbly delights between careful fingers. It's powdered sugar dusting you like winter snow. Paired with a sip of the dark, foamy drink, the effect is transformative. The bitter nethy sweetness clings faintly on your fingertips as you lean back again. But the room shifts almost imperceptibly into a landscape of movement and travel. The Ottoman world, after all, was not confined to Istanbul's cozy beneath the hiss of the cezve and the fluttering of sugar-dusted fingers. Caravans groaned across deserts, and ships rocked steadily across seas, determined to carry these beans far beyond fountain courtyards. Tonight, you're not just lounging, you're hitching a ride into the veins of trade itself. Beyond the soft walls of cushion and conversation, you imagine hoofbeats on packed sand. Camels sway beneath heaps of goods, their shadows stretching like wavering brushstrokes across the endless golden canvas. Somewhere within those leathery saddlebags lies the future. Sacks of carefully packed coffee beans heading northward to Cairo, westward to Damascus, eastward along trade routes that stitched lifetimes together, called the Silk Road. The beans are tucked beneath quantities of cinnamon, indigo, pepper, and bolts of cloth. But their scent is bold enough to sneak into the air anyway, faint hint of nutty bitterness carried on dusty winds. Fact, by the 16th and 17th centuries, Yemen had become the primary supplier of coffee beans for the Ottoman Empire, exporting through the port of Mocha. Yes, that Mocha. From there, caravans dragged them northward, where Ottoman merchants claimed the fine art of turning beans into ritual. From there, coffee began its stowaway journey across Europe, evolving into a world-altering addiction. You can almost hear the creak of ships, Arab sails angling against Mediterranean winds, cargo shifting below decks. A quirky image that makes you chuckle, according to scattered tales. Some ingenious smugglers and travelers went so far as to tuck raw beans into folds of fabric or hide roasted samples in pockets, sneaking them past watchful guards who tried with limited success to monopolize the trade. Imagine uncuffing your sleeve after a long journey and scattering a few roasted beans onto a merchant's table with a wink. Care for a drink that will keep you awake until you've memorized the stars. As your imagination pulls you aboard a ship pushing its way north. You settle into the rocking rhythm, the deck creaking beneath you. The smell of salt mixes with the faint but unmistakable aroma of coffee stored below. Sailors bend knots with one hand and cradle cups in the other. The waves themselves seem to cradle you gently, reminding you that rest doesn't belong only to pillows and courtyards. It belongs even mid-sea, riding the deep blue with foam, not just in your cup, but foaming at the ship's prow. Historians still wonder where the exact tipping point occurred. Was it Cairo, where coffee spread feverishly through markets as scholars and traders embraced the insomnia fuel? Or was it Venice, where the drink first astonished Europeans with its dark power and became, much to the alarm of suspicious priests, the fashionable buzz among elites? The where hangs unresolved, caught like sails tugging in opposite winds. For now, you accept the mystery. The night stretches above you, desert stars wheeling slowly, salt air or dry winds, depending on whether you picture yourself on a camel's back or tucked beneath a sail. Either way, you sit with that familiar tiny cup, soothingly bitter, endlessly patient. The journey is vast, but the sip is small. The two balance each other, and in that balance, you let your body relax into rhythm. You feel yourself swaying half from the imagined camel gait, half from the rocking of your ship, half from the ebbing buzz of your cup. Yes, that's 3 halves. Math isn't reliable this late, and as merchants mutter about profits and sailors tie off sails, you find that your heartbeat has synced itself with the deep ancient pulse of trade. Steady, steady, steady. The beans travel further. Your eyelids grow heavier. Coffee is not a prisoner of one empire anymore, is a wanderer, and you, lucky listener, are a stowaway along for the sleepy ride. SS softens, the sweetness deepens, and the play between them is what keeps everyone coming back, hour after hour. These aren't separate rituals, they're halves of one whole. bitterness woven with sweetness like the warp and weft of Ottoman carpets. Asterisk nearby. A student munches through candied quince while scribbling verses, a multitasking hero, if there ever was one. Across the room, someone tilts their head back, eyes closed, savoring the exact balance of sweetness after swallow. And over at the conspiracy table, two men actually pause their plotting to argue about which type of nut tastes best with strong coffee. Frankly, they're right. This may have been the more important political debate of the century. Asterisk, and here lingers the open question that historians gently nudge. Was the pairing of sweets and coffee meant purely for taste, or did it hold a deeper social function? Did sharing sugared fruits create gentle equality at the table, ensuring that bitter truths were softened with sweetness in both mouth and mood? Or was it just convenience, a practical way to keep people awake and smiling until dawn? The answer is unclear, hanging in the air like cinnamon dust. Asterisk, and as for you, reclining against yet another embroidery-heavy cushion, sugar melting slowly on your tongue, you realize the answer doesn't matter much. Because right now the formula works. Bitter and sweet, tension and ease, seriousness and play, coffee and lokum dance together. And so do these long, drowsy hours of night. Asterisk, your cup is small, your snack is small, but both make the evening large enough to contain laughter, poetry, and even the odd political conspiracy discussed at volume levels that wouldn't wake a nearby napper. You lean back, the sugar and coffee wrapping you in equal measure, warm and sweet-edged, as your eyes begin to soften again. Asterisk, asterisk. The sea air and desert winds begin to fade, and soon you're stepping softly into a chamber, far quieter, though no less charged with possibility. Here, the foam on your cup feels like it holds greater stakes than just flavor, its diplomacy in liquid form. Welcome to the world where coffee became more than comfort or controversy. Here, it became a tool of politics. Asterisk, imagine long halls lined with embroidered drapes, lanterns burning patiently, and silver trays arriving with theatrical timing. You've found yourself at a gathering of envoys, ambassadors, advisors, men with carefully trimmed beards, who measure both their words and their sips with exacting care. The golden saucers and cups sparkle just enough that you half expect someone to weigh them on scales before daring to drink. Asterisk. Here's a solid historical fact. Coffee became central to Ottoman diplomacy. Envoys arriving from Europe often found themselves seated in richly appointed salons, greeted not with wine, but with steaming cups of Ottoman coffee. It was an introduction, a declaration, even a negotiation in itself. To share a cup was to say, let us begin this carefully. Asterisk, you notice the rhythm of this meeting. One man lays out a proposal about trade routes and territories, then pauses while attendants pour another round. The foam rises, settles, is admired, then sipped through with practiced calm. Another envoy nods gravely in agreement, not necessarily to the politics, you suspect, but to the fabulous cardamom note blooming in his brew. The two become indistinguishable, alliances and aftertastes. Asterisk, a quirky little image you can't help but enjoy. Some sources tell us European diplomats often had no idea what they were drinking, calling it black broth or likening it to bitter ink. A few wrote nervously that they had to pretend to enjoy it, lest they offend. Imagine squinting at a cup, thinking this tastes like boiled despair, while nodding solemnly to preserve your nation's dignity. Yet slowly, almost embarrassingly, they admitted the drink grew on them. After all, you can't reject every cup from men who controlled an empire stretching across continents. Asterisk. But here's where historians still scratch at the mystery. Did coffee truly sway diplomacy, shaping treaties, or was it merely symbolic, a pause written in liquid instead of parchment? Did caffeine give men sharper thoughts and longer stamina for arguments, or was its power only in slowing the conversation down long enough that tempers cooled? You gaze across the table and realize maybe the answer doesn't matter. The theater of the sip was enough. Asterisk, you lean in closer to your own tiny porcelain cup. The foam shimmers faintly under the lamplight. Like diplomatic language, it's self-attractive, delicate, capable of collapsing in one careless movement. You sip politely, and the warmth runs through you, as though you've just ratified a little treaty of your own between body and mind. You agree not to fall asleep while your brain agrees not to sprint away into anxious thoughts. Asterisk, the room drifts into hushed sound. Foreigners murmur to interpreters. Ottoman advisors fold their hands across their laps. The smell of coffee seems heavier here, infused with anticipation. Outside, the city may bustle, but inside, foam and patience have tamed the rhythms of negotiation into velvety slowness. Asterisk, and the faint humor is impossible to miss. Empires rose and borders shifted, yet so many moments hinged on men politely sipping foamy cups no bigger than walnuts. You can't help but imagine all of history looking less like dramatic sword fights and maps, and more like half-drowsy people saying, "Yes, let's revisit the treaty terms, after one more round." Asterisk, you sigh softly into the cushion, the warmth of the foam escorting you toward something gently heavy behind your eyes. Foam not just as hospitality, but as history's oddly charming middleman. Asterisk, asterisk. You leave the lantern-lit diplomacy chamber, still carrying the soft aftertaste of seriousness. But before you can sink too far into comfort, someone tugs your sleeve and says, "Ah, yes, it's time to see coffee get banned." Banned. Truly. You blink. Yes, indeed. Welcome to the chapter of Ottoman life, in which rulers declared sometimes quite dramatically that no one should be sipping these scandalous little cups. Asterisk, the air outside feels brisker, as if waiting for mischief. You wander through quieter streets until the kahvehane comes into view again. This time, though, the atmosphere is different. Whispers flutter nervously. A few lamps have been doused. Someone strums a lute half-heartedly, as though it might camouflage the steam curling out of a copper pot. Inside, patrons are leaning in conspiratorially, but not about politics. This time about indulgence. They're drinking in defiance of imperial bans. Asterisk, the fact is clear. At several points in Ottoman history, coffee was outlawed. Some sultans fretted that it led to sleepless crowds, gossiping too boldly, or plotting rebellion too freely. One ruler even worried the coffeehouses functioned as shadow governments. And so, stern decrees rolled out: no coffee, no gathering, no foamy fun. Authorities promised to shutter the doors and pour away the night's comfort. Asterisk. Imagine it's nothing out coffee in Istanbul is like banning bread. Proclamations went up, guards patrolled, pots were confiscated. Accounts even mentioned sultans ordering coffee drinkers punished harshly, often to make examples of them. But just beneath the surface was the plain truth. Nobody cared. Patrons returned, kettles bubbled, and foam crowned cups again within days. It was like trying to ban laughter. Impractical, hilarious, doomed from the start. Asterisk, here's a delightful quirky detail. In some neighborhoods, cafe keepers supposedly disguised their shops as bar, the kind where men lounged and chatted while hair was trimmed. Only, instead of scissor snipping, it was cezve hissing. People came in for a shave, left fully caffeinated, and strolled home without a hair out of place. Other owners installed secret back rooms behind wooden doors or arranged their shops to look like quiet family parlors with suspiciously too many cushions. Asterisk. Historians puzzle over the question: were these bans genuine attempts at control, or symbolic gestures, a show of strength by rulers who knew enforcement would fail? Were they sternly serious or quietly performative, the imperial equivalent of shaking a finger at misbehaving children? The debate continues, mostly fueled by the obvious. People didn't stop drinking coffee. Not then, not ever. Asterisk, you sip again, leaning into your cushion, eyeing the supposed outlaws around you. They don't look rebellious. A few older men are playing backgammon with sighs long enough to lull you to drowsiness. Two students bend over a book of poetry, mumbling compared rhymes. It's hardly the stuff of uprisings. Yet somewhere in the empire's fabric, rulers were convinced this quiet fellowship posed a threat. The irony makes you smile. Coffee's greatest crime was apparently making people too conversational. To ban it was to ban words themselves, to outlaw laughter and chessboards. Maybe that was why it failed. And so, quietly across the city, lights were dimmed, cups were raised, and a whole society treated the emperor's disapproval like background noise, much as a cat treats your request not to sit on the clean laundry. Another round is placed by your elbow. Foam sits on the surface, patient and unconcerned with laws. You sip, warm and amused, and realize history's bans dissolve into laughter, just as sugar dissolves into coffee. The bans, the conspiracies, the sugar, all of it drifts into the quiet hours of the night, when the kahvehane stopped resembling hubs of rebellion or laughter, and transformed simply into sanctuaries of wakefulness. You notice that by now, some patrons have reclined entirely into their cushions, toes stretched like weary cats. But in one corner, a cluster of scholars, students, and outright stubborn night owls are still awake, their eyes glimmering more brightly than the oil lamps. And here's where coffee reveals its other identity. Not rebellion, not ritual, but a fuel for long nights of study. You slip into their circle and immediately hear the soft scratch of reed pens tracing across parchment. Books are strewn on the floor, handwritten manuscripts spread open in overlapping piles, their ink rich and black. Young men lean over geometry problems, others recite lines of poetry by memory, the occasional yawn betraying their effort more than their dedication. Coffee keeps them glued to these pages, the way glue sticks. A curious child's fingers to everything they touch. The historical fact stands. Coffee became the lifeline of scholars throughout the Ottoman Empire, treasured not just in courtyards, but in study halls. Its reputation as the drink that wakes you meant that theologians, poets, physicians, and students alike embraced it wholeheartedly, especially when deadlines or, in their case, exams or nights that otherwise would have collapsed into darkness unfurled instead into lengthy hours of scribbles, circles of debate, minds carried forward by cups, both bitter and bitterly necessary. One quirky detail makes you grin as the students chatter. Some records show that certain scholars, those on the eternal quest for more efficient study methods, would gulp their coffee at such alarming strength, grounds and all, that their friends teased them for it. Imagine watching your colleague chew on half-liquid coffee like it's a snack, eyes shining with jittery devotion to his alchemy notes. Not exactly what brewers had in mind, but desperate times call for crunchy measures. Historians still wonder how much we owe to those sleepless nights. Did coffee extend the reach of knowledge by unlocking hours once dark and unproductive? Were the treatises and translations, the very scaffolding of science, philosophy, and medicine in the empire partly built on sleep-deprived scribbles, fueled by a frothy midnight cup? It's an open question, but you can picture the scene clearly. Yawns stifled, thoughts sharpened, a rhythm created by alternating between ink-stained fingers and porcelain edges warming their hands. One student near you recites the anatomy of the human body with precise clarity, though you suspect he will forget half by daylight. Another argues fiercely over mathematics, his friend insisting he's added incorrectly, though you're almost certain both are wrong. Still, their determination is admirable after all. Who among us hasn't convinced ourselves that staying up all night is the secret to success, only to regret it when faced with morning sunlight? And yet, in this candlelit chamber, the late-night cramming feels cozy rather than stressful. The lamps glow steadily. The fountain outside mutters its low lullaby. The air smells of ink, candle wax, and, always, coffee. Notes fill the silence. Laughter interrupts the seriousness. And even as exhaustion sneaks in around the edges, the warmth of the cup insists upon one more page, one more solved line, one more recited verse. Asterisk, you sit quietly with your own drink, watching ink form thoughts, and thoughts form ripples across faces softened by lamplight. And there's something oddly comforting in realizing that sleepless students, 5 centuries ago, were doing exactly what sleepless students now still do: complain, cram, drink something strong, and promise just a few more minutes. Asterisk, and if tomorrow they forget lines of poetry or botch equations, it won't matter. Tonight was about being together in wakefulness, rescued from silence by cups, small enough to keep the fragile balance between exhaustion and inspiration. Asterisk, asterisk. The pages of the student's books curled gently in the lamplight, ink drying into permanence while your eyes begin to drift. Eventually you ease yourself out from their sleepless circle, stepping once more into the broader hum of Ottoman life. It is quieter, noun, conspiracies, no bands. Just the steady rhythm of a custom so deeply absorbed into daily life that it runs practically unnoticed. Coffee has left the realm of novelty, opposition, and even solemn ritual. It has become, well, routine. Asterisk, you wander down alabaster streets lined with little shops, where the morning begins with merchants sweeping their thresholds and women gossiping lightly outside their homes. Each doorway holds the same small gestures: someone holding a brass pot, heating water slowly, waiting with patience. Coffee is not just about politics or philosophy anymore. It travels into weddings, neighborhood hospitality, and heartbeats of everyday life, woven into the acts that stitch a society together quietly, without fanfare. A solid fact floats into your ears as naturally as morning chatter. Serving coffee became a central piece of Ottoman domestic ritual by the 17th century onward. Brides-to-be were expected to show their skills in brewing foam-laden cups. Hosts proved their generosity by offering them promptly. Friends became closer over them. Hospitality required declining to prepare coffee for a guest was considered an insult, a neglect of the simplest openness between humans. Asterisk. And here's one quirky detail that leaves you smiling softly. In some villages, women would purposefully brew terrible coffee for unwanted suitors overground, salted, hoping that the poor fellow would take the hint. It was the Ottoman version of swiping left, not a ghosting, but a politely bitter rejection you could taste immediately. In that sense, coffee quietly regulated marriages as much as it supplied warm conversation. Asterisk, the world around you bustles gently, isn't it so? A neighbor knocks on another's wooden door, a pot balanced in her hands, the foam trembling but intact. She isn't visiting with news or with gifts, just with coffee. Invitations often required no written words, simply appearing with a steaming pot declared enough. To refuse coffee was to refuse friendship, which was almost unthinkable. Asterisk, historians still wonder at the exact moment when coffee lost its radical edge and settled into familiarity. Was it when bans were laughed away? When sultans and scholars alike proved that drinkers weren't toppling off balconies in intoxication, but just scribbling through midnight? Or was it simply time, smoothing the controversial into the expected, as it does with almost everything given enough centuries? Asterisk. You find yourself sitting again in a courtyard. No sultan, no spies, no rebellious poets hovering in corners, just gentle domestic laughter. 2 neighbors swap small porcelain cups, lids clinking lightly, hands brushing as they exchange the foamy brew. A boy hums as he carries a tray to his aunt across the way. A guest accepts with quiet satisfaction, sipping slowly, nodding as though this single small cup means safety, warmth, and trust. And perhaps it does. Asterisk, the old tension between sacred or sinful, rebellious or respectable, has slipped quietly away, and what remains is the simple, timeless act of waiting while the pot hisses, sipping slowly, pausing to exhale steam into night air. The details you have witnessed, the conspiracies, the bands, the harem jokes. The diplomacy have folded themselves into ordinary lives. The dazzling performance has been absorbed into a hum, asterisk, and you know, nestled back against a cushion, that perhaps this was always what coffee was meant for. Not extravagant politics or forbidden thrills, but the daily intimacy of waking up, welcoming a friend, keeping someone company in the quiet middle of an afternoon. It is no longer remarkable here. It is simply lived. The porcelain cup tilts once again into your hand, the foam spreading lightly across the rim, and you think so many worlds in a single sip. You linger in that courtyard, listening as the clink of porcelain slowly fades, blending into the gentle rustle of fabric and the murmurs of content neighbors. The journey has carried you from conspiratorial chess players and whispered bands, from foam red like fortune to sultans who turned a sip into theater. And at last, you're here, resting deeply into what coffee became, not rebellion, not ritual, not even routine, but something softer still, a quiet echo inside your own cup. Asterisk, the candle near you flickers low, its wax spilling lazily, and you tilt your cup, watching the final drops swirl with grounds at the bottom. Historians tell us that the Ottoman ritual of coffee lies behind much of what the world now knows as culture. The cafes of Europe, the espresso shots of Italy, the bustling cafes of Paris where minds argued through revolutions. All of it trickled out from those first foamy cups brewed slowly over charcoals in Istanbul, a sip in the shadow of a mosque, or tucked into a merchant's courtyard, eventually reached every tired hand across continents. Asterisk, yet what strikes you most in this moment isn't coffee's story as a global legacy, but its echo in the small things. You look around the courtyard, and you can imagine every modern person who has ever leaned against a window in the early morning, holding their drink like a reassuring talisman. The continuity is astounding. Hundreds of years, empires rising and fading, debates and conspiracies, sweets and salted pranks all streaming into the simple ritual people still practice today. Eyes half shut, breaths deep, cups hot. Asterisk, one quirky detail that lingers. Travelers centuries later noted that the grounds at the bottom of Ottoman cups always surprised them. Unlike filtered modern brews, these cups left sediment behind, a silent promise that patience rewarded the cautious sipper. Drink too quickly, and you end with grit between your teeth. Sip properly, and grounds fall quietly to the bottom, leaving you clean finishes, and sometimes even fortunes to imagine. The grounds were always a reminder. Take life slowly, or it will kindly remind you to. Asterisk. And here's the question still hovering across centuries that historians never settle. Was coffee adopted everywhere, simply because of the bean itself, its magic, its wakefulness, or because it inherited the Ottoman slowness? Was it the ritual as much as the stimulant? No one is certain, though your peaceful eyelids suggest it may be the slowness that lingers most. Asterisk, the lantern glow softens. Even the chatter of neighbors feels hushed now, as though everyone has finally agreed that words have done enough work for the evening. You raise your last sip warm still, patient hand. Close your eyes on the thought that what lingers in this foam, despite all the noise of history, is a whisper. Steady breathing, steady sipping, steady being. Asterisk, your fingers cradle the porcelain as though you are the last guest at the kahvehane. Its carpets sighing beneath you, its fountain humming faintly outside. The night expands, stars waiting overhead, the city sinking into a quiet rhythm. The journey has come full circle. Coffeehouse to courtyard, sultan to study hall, gossip to diplomacy, band to bedtime. And now, coffee waits not as history, but as the anchor in your own slow inhale and quiet exhale. Asterisk, the Ottoman coffee ritual lasted longer than most meetings. Indeed, long enough to wrap you like a blanket, warm enough to outlast centuries, and gentle enough to lead you calmly toward rest. Asterisk, now, your cup is empty, and the story has spilled into quiet. The courtyard where you sit is soft with carpets, The fountain, a steady sigh. And somewhere, far off, the last strains of lute music flutter and fade. You feel yourself loosening, breath slowing to match the rhythm of the city's slumber. Asterisk, inhale, softly. Exhale, softer still. The night is no longer heavy with debate or laughter, but light, carrying only the slow drift of your own body into rest. The sense, the sweetness of lokum, the faint smokiness of the coals fade into memory. Your cushion holds you deeper and deeper, as though gravity has grown gentler, not heavier. Asterisk, picture yourself lying beneath the Ottoman sky, the lamps dimmed one by one in the city below. Pillars and domes outline themselves against the darkness, but no noise interrupts you, nothing tugs at your mind. The empire itself breathes with you, steady and slow. The foam on the coffee has vanished, but the calm remains, a softness that slides into you the way water slips into sand. Asterisk, the ground holds you. The sky covers you. No more sultans to impress, no conspiracies to overhear, no games to forget, just stillness. Your breaths grow longer now, like the pause between sips in a foam-crowned cup. Let your chest rise. Let it fall. Let it slow again. Timeless. Easy. Done. Asterisk, you have traveled centuries tonight, and yet you return to yourself lighter, easier, soothed by small echoes that stretch across history, cups passed hand to hand, voices dissolving into night, caffeine drifting into lullabies. It was never only drink. It was always ritual, always a pause waiting for you. Asterisk, and now, your pause is here. Sleep waits kindly for you, brewed to perfection.